Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. We're your hosts, Em and Jay, and today the two of us are talking about the third episode of She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. When it comes to this episode, we feel like there was a lot of opportunity for lore and world building and to really explore those aspects of the storytelling, but ultimately the show just didn't take advantage of that, and it was pretty disappointing. This episode begins with the three kids and the horse they picked up reaching Bright Moon. Glimmer breaks off from the group so she can recharge her powers and also confront her mother about leaving while she was grounded. I do like that this scene mostly is them just talking to each other instead of yelling at each other. So far, most of their interactions have just been them yelling at each other. Yeah, it can be really obnoxious. It's a nice change of pace to have them talk to each other like normal people. They may not be on the same page still, but they're trying to work things out without yelling at each other. In the meantime, Bow sneaks Adora into the castle, and they all decide that the best thing to do is to hide her for now, and then they'll present She-Ra to the queen, and eventually they'll get around to telling the queen about the Horde situation with Adora, which makes sense as a plan because the Horde is their greatest enemy. Adora isn't so sure about this plan though, because she doesn't know if she has a great grasp on She-Ra's powers. She doesn't even know if she can turn into She-Ra because the only time she's ever done it was when someone was in danger. So they leave Adora alone to figure it out. We end up seeing more of Adora's clumsiness in this scene. It's a little strange considering the fact that she's basically been training her whole life around weapons, and her being this clumsy with a sword, it just doesn't really make sense. It's just strange to see this trained girl who's supposed to be a warrior be so clumsy and incompetent with the sword. It does feel like she doesn't have a lot of experience. It seems like this is all very, very new to her. I understand the powers are, but you'd think that fighting and swords in general, you'd think that she would understand the reach of swords. Like when she lifts it up, she ends up getting the sword caught on some of Glimmer's decorations. And you'd think that she would maybe have addressed her surroundings before she even tried doing that. She acts like she doesn't have a lot of experience, and that's not what we've seen in the earlier episode. It's just very inconsistent with her character and her background. And again, I'm sure this was done for comedic effect, but the thing with comedy, they could have tried to maybe work the comedy into more of what would have worked with Adora's background. They could have stuck with a kind of fish out of water style comedy for Adora. Yeah, they expect us to believe that she was good enough to be Force Captain, and now she seems totally incompetent with weaponry. It's just too much of an inconsistency, even if it is just for a joke. Eventually she goes outside to where the horse is, and again she tries to transform into She-Ra in a scene that goes on too long. Obviously, the audience at this point understands that it's not working, and yet they still drag the scene on anyway. And I feel like instead of dragging the scene on, where she keeps trying to transform and she's trying different voices, they could have had her have a moment where she sits down and starts to ask herself, why isn't this working? And maybe this could have been a good moment for her to try to reflect on what she does know about She-Ra. Yeah, when she first picked up the sword, there were a lot of visions that flashed before her eyes. Later in the episode, we do see her revisit the flashbacks, but she doesn't really analyze them. They just kind of happen. A lot of them go by so quickly that it doesn't really have the time to reflect on what each was, even to see her speculate. Something she could have done is question Grayskull. She could have said, how am I supposed to fight for fight for the honor of Grayskull when I don't even know what Grayskull is? She came from the Horde, which she now knows was a very manipulative and very dangerous force, but she switches over without really asking any questions. And you think from someone who came from such a terrible place that she would be more skeptical, because she spent her whole life believing that the Horde were the good guys and that she was a part of the good guys. Yeah, so it makes sense if she just didn't know what to believe anymore and took the time to think about what was going on and find out everything she could before really making a decision for herself. Because nobody really knows anything about the first ones. She knows Glimmer and Bow, and yes, they do seem like good people. So I think it's fair that she came to that conclusion that at least Bright Moon is definitely better than the Horde. It would have been interesting if maybe she had questioned, what is Grayskull? How can I call on the honor of Grayskull to use this power when I don't know what it is, and I'm not even sure if it's necessarily a good thing? And considering the fact that they don't have the rights to Grayskull or Eternia and so on and so forth, I don't really understand why they even bothered bringing it up. Maybe they should have just used the Crystal Castle, considering the fact that that's what they have the rights to. Why doesn't Light Hope and the Crystal Castle and the first ones just be the end of it? Why are they bringing up Eternia and Grayskull to begin with? Netflix's She-Ra isn't really a Masters of the Universe property like the original was. It's just its own thing. So why not stay within your own continuity? But getting back to the episode, after messing around with the sword for a while, Adora is finally able to get a reaction out of it. However, instead of being able to transform herself, she accidentally manages to transform the horse. The horse doesn't have the best reaction to this, which makes sense considering the fact that it was just a normal horse and it wasn't spirit. So it ends up flying off, and while Adora is pursuing it, attempting to calm it down, he ends up knocking off her shawl, which was covering her horde symbol. And in doing so, it causes a panic among the people there, and they chase her into the woods. There she discovers a kooky old woman living in the woods who turns out to be this show's version of Madame Razz. Raz mistakes her for someone named Mara, and this is actually one of the things that does come up later in the show, and it makes me wish that they had addressed some of the other things. Because if there are people on social media asking questions like, what is Grayskull? Then I think that that is something the audience wanted to know. And I imagine if they hadn't addressed it, they probably would have asked, why was that lady calling her Mara? Madame Razz acknowledges that Adora can't be the same girl that she's thinking of, but she still continues to call her Mara anyway. Adora chooses to follow her because she seems to know something about the sword, and considering that no one really knows much of anything about the first ones, it makes sense that she would follow her hoping to learn something, even though she does seem like she's not entirely there. They come across another one of those first ones buildings, and Madame Razz climbs it in an attempt to get berries, but she ends up falling off while it activates. It projects stars, and Madame Razz says that she and Mara used to look at the stars all the time, and she asks what happened to the stars, which is a question that I had never been asking these past two episodes. I don't think I even noticed. Did the Horde do something to the stars? Does this have anything to do with the Horde at all? Is this really a question we need to ask right now, though? Yeah. I mean, we already have a lot of questions. And I don't know if it's a question that really comes up again. I think that maybe instead of projecting the stars, it could have projected Grayskull. It would have been interesting to see what Adora's reaction would be to Grayskull, because she really doesn't know anything about it other than that's what she has to call on the honor of in order to transform into She-Ra. Maybe at first she wouldn't know what to think, but then Madame Razz could say, Castle Grayskull, a place of great power and protection. And it could have been a reference to both He-Man and She-Ra. I think that would have been a good idea. But the stars do remind Adora of the visions that she had earlier. But instead of really going over what she's remembering, she just says that she knows these things, but she doesn't really know how. And she doesn't really ask how or do any mental searching to try to figure out how. I do wish that Adora was more proactive. She's very clearly trying, but she's so stuck on just these couple of things that it's really distracting her. She ends up doing the same thing over and over again, just hoping that eventually it'll work, instead of trying to figure something else out. They come across more destruction caused by the Horde, and Adora's very upset by this. Madame Razz gives her a pep talk and ultimately tells her to do what she believes is best. She decides that this is wrong and that she has to do something about it. Then they hear the horse from earlier crying, and they find that it's being captured by the Horde, and she is finally able to transform back into She-Ra. I feel like they wanted this moment to show some growth within Adora, but I don't know if it worked the way that they wanted it to. earlier in the episode, she was saying that she was afraid she could only use the She-Ra powers when someone was in trouble. And then the first time we see her transform into She-Ra after saying that was to save someone who was in trouble. So we haven't literally seen a change in her.
Also, the realization she comes to after Madame Raz's pep talk is something that she's already decided. So this isn't actually new information either.
As soon as she saw that the Horde was attacking that village of innocent people, she knew it was wrong and she wanted it to stop. She did try to go to them and talk to them, and when that didn't work, she decided to abandon them. I don't feel that we got any new information out of all this.
So She-Ra fights the Horde, but she gets hit by a laser and that ends up taking her out. Madame Raz has to get them out of there by saying razzle dazzle and throwing a smoke bomb. And when Adora wakes up, Madame Raz tells her that she was talking to Swiftwind, who gave himself a proper name after being called Horsey the entire episode.
Honestly, I don't understand the decisions that they made with Swiftwind. We don't see him again after this episode until around episode 12.
Why didn't he just join them here?
There are lots of times throughout the series that they could have used him.
Also, why isn't he talking on screen? He obviously can. He talked to Madame Raz.
They're trying to play it off as if she's crazy again, but we all know that he talks. You're not fooling anybody.
At first, he was clearly panicking, but afterwards, once they escape the Horde, he's perfectly fine and content with his new form.
It is disappointing because I think that having him be more involved in the show probably would have been an asset to them. And I do think he has a pretty decent design, even though I do kind of wish he had a mask.
He looks more or less like the original Swiftwind design. He's just not wearing the mask and other armor pieces, but whatever. It's better than most of the other designs.
She says her goodbyes to Madame Raz, and then she flies back to Bright Moon on Swiftwind. He just disappears after this.
She-Ra finally reveals herself to the people of Bright Moon while the Queen and Glimmer are in the middle of an argument, and she pledges her allegiance to the rebellion.
This does mean that she was able to transform into She-Ra without someone needing to be in danger, but it also happened off screen.
So we didn't actually get to see that development for ourselves.
She also reveals who she really is to the whole court,
which I'm not a big fan of, but whatever. This is a different show, and doing its own thing.
And the Queen asks Glimmer if she would take responsibility for Adora, who agrees, so she accepts She-Ra into the rebellion. Back in the Fright Zone, Catra is really missing Adora, and I do feel for her in the sense that she's obviously hurting, but at the same time, she is the one who caused this separation. Adora did try to reach out to her and invite her to leave too,
but it was Catra who ultimately rejected. So she's putting it on herself by choosing to stay in the Horde, which she knows is an abusive, manipulative, evil power over her best friend / adopted sister.
When Shadow Weaver confronts her about what happened when they first met She-Ra, Catra says that if Adora wanted to be with the Horde, she would be, and that she deserted and she's starting to feel like Adora had the right idea. And honestly, yes, Catra, Adora did have the right idea. Just leave. I know that in this season, things do look like they're working out for her, but I really feel like in the long run, that's not going to be the case. And I feel like she would really end a lot of her suffering now if she would just choose Adora over the Horde. But she can't really let go of her past.
And I think in the end, she wants that power more than anything.
Shadow Weaver takes Catra to see Hordak because she wants Hordak to punish her. And I do like that Catra is visibly afraid of Hordak because it shows what Hordak's position should be. Shadow Weaver tells Hordak that Catra caused this embarrassing failure for the Horde by not retrieving Adora and bringing her back. And Hordak says, so you're still down at Force Captain. Shadow Weaver says that it's okay because they aren't gonna rest until Adora's back, but Hordak says, no, just make Catra your new Force Captain.
He completely dismisses the fact that Adora has deserted them, and he just doesn't care at all, and it's really shocking because this is a huge problem for them. Even if he doesn't care about Adora personally, which is fine, he probably didn't even know she existed before, but everything she knows about the Horde, she can use against them, and she can give the rebels information about the Horde that they could use to take them down, and yet he completely dismisses it, and he just looks like such an incompetent leader. It looks terrible for him as a character.
It seems like like it doesn't even cross his mind that she could be a problem. She's probably the biggest problem they've ever faced, and at this point they don't even know that she's She-Ra.
So it's just gonna get worse and worse for them. She's basically their biggest threat, and even without knowing that she's She-Ra, it's still a huge threat to them, and he refuses to take it seriously. Meanwhile, Shadow Weaver is the complete opposite. She's practically obsessed with Adora, and they didn't really go into a lot of detail as to why both of these characters have such strong feelings.
They don't really explain why Shadow Weaver cares so much about Adora and why Hordak couldn't care less. The truth is, Catra was leading that attack, and it did end in failure. But Hordak doesn't seem to care at all. He just says, okay, you're Force Captain now. He doesn't seem to care about this defeat. He doesn't seem to care that they lost a Force Captain. I just don't know what he's actually doing. He says to just go on as if nothing's changed. But how are they supposed to do that? Obviously, something has changed. But for Catra, this is great for her because now she's been promoted, and that makes her happy. And she's also probably happy that Shadow Weaver got told.
Yeah, I'm really disappointed with the way they treated Shadow Weaver in this series. She deserved so much better. She was such a great character in the original, and here she's just so one-dimensional and there's really nothing to her.
She's just completely obsessed with Adora, and that's it. It is strange that the number 1 of the Horde and the number 2 of the Horde just are not at all on the same page. How did that end up happening?
Yeah, it seems like the Horde has really bad communication skills. They don't work as a well-oiled machine at all.
How does Shadow Weaver not know that Hordak couldn't care less about Adora?
That's a good point.
How did this all go so wrong for her? She went there expecting that Catra would get into a lot of trouble.
Would be disciplined. And instead the exact opposite happened.
She's the one who was disciplined.
Why did they treat Shadow Weaver so poorly in this show?
I don't know. I don't understand why Hordak is favoring Catra. Does Hordak know something about Catra that we don't, and that's why he's favoring her? Or what is it about Catra that he decided just to promote her right on the spot? Because Shadow Weaver is the one who promoted Adora, and she's also the one who spent all this time with Adora and Catra, and Hordak has probably been doing whatever he's been doing with those machines.
Yeah, he probably hasn't been focusing on the cadets or learning anything about them at all.
Because that's probably Shadow Weaver's job.
But at the same time, shouldn't he know this stuff? I mean, shouldn't he care about who's in his army and how competent they are?
And who's leading his army?
Yeah, this whole scene really doesn't work. And to be honest, a lot about Shadow Weaver and Hordak's character just doesn't work. And it's so strange because they were such great characters and there was so much to work with.
In the original, they really were far more in sync. Overall, this episode had some pretty poor pacing. There was a lot of time that was dedicated to telling jokes that could have been used to build lore, or to have a little bit more story progression, or to have better character development.
More meaningful interactions. But instead, we mostly got drawn out humor
of Adora and this new character, Madame Razz, walking through the woods. There were a lot of callbacks in this episode to the original series, which is again kind of the clash between this show being a reboot and this show also wanting to be its own thing. They've said several times that this series is for a new generation. It's not meant for fans of the original.
Yeah, they clearly have no interest in the original anyway. They've said multiple times that they never watched the show.
This episode featured Madame Razz heavily, who was a character in the original, but in this series, there's not really a reason that this character had to be called Madame Razz.
Yeah, she didn't really share much in common with the original anyway.
They don't really have the same color schemes. They have very different looks.
And very different lifestyles, too. I mean, this one's basically a hermit who lives alone in the woods, and Madame Razz just wasn't like that at all.
In the original, she was a part of the rebellion. She was with them all the way. She would fight with them. She would go out with them on missions.
And she was also very close to Adora. She's one of the few people who knew her secret.
This Madame Razz has a very different look. They changed her hat with the holes in it for her eyes to just glasses.
Her design is very basic, I think. Like, the original Madame Razz was pretty distinct, but here I just kind of got the feeling that we've seen this character multiple times before. With characters like Madame Mim from The Sword and the stone and so on.
It's very reminiscent of other character designs. It's a little unfortunate because they had the original to go off of. I sort of feel like they just wanted to have this character and they just kind of stuck the name Madame Raz onto it.
Yeah.
There's a couple things, like she says razzle dazzle a few times, but we really don't get to see a lot of magic. She kind of uses the force on her broom, and she does throw a berry smoke bomb, but did she have to say razzle dazzle to do that? Or was that just something that she said because it's quirky?
Yeah, quirky. There was also a plushie of Cowl in Glimmer's room, but that bothered me because it was only in frame for a few seconds, and then it disappeared for the rest of the scene. So that was an inconsistency that bothered me.
It almost seems like, why did they have it at all if they weren't going to keep it even as a part of the background?
Yeah.
Because new fans who are not familiar with the original wouldn't know anything about Cowl. They wouldn't know that that was a character. So what's the point?
It was the same thing with Lookie on Madame Raz's fan. Other people who haven't seen the original might not even realize that she's referring to the face on her fan when she says, "Oh, there's Lookie, he's always hiding." Because it goes by so quickly.
The thing is, when she opens and closes her fan, she's talking to Adora about Mara, and the audience is probably more focused on what she's saying, and also wondering who this kooky old lady who lives in the woods is to even notice the fan. So when she brings it up again later, they probably don't really know what she's referencing. So what's the point of even having a reference if you don't care about original fans watching the show and new fans aren't going to notice? The questions that new fans of this series did have, like what is Grayskull, weren't answered, but then there was time spent on these references that they probably didn't even notice. But that was our take on this episode. These are all our own opinions, and we know that there are people who don't agree with us, which is totally fine.
We just want to take a look at the show for what it is, and talk about how it could be improved and what it did well.
We also wanted to look at this show as a way to look at the animation industry as a whole, because modern animation right now is having this trend of focusing a lot on comedy, and maybe not so much on lore. And comedy is great, it's really important to laugh, but children are also so imaginative. I think it's great that cartoons can show kids what their imaginations can do when they let
all
it go.
the possibilities that come from world building that a lot of modern shows don't really seem to be taking advantage of.
But if you'd like, you can leave a comment telling us your thoughts.
You can also like and subscribe if you're interested in seeing more of our content.
We're going to be continuing going through each episode of this series, so if you'd like to see more of that.
Anyway, thanks for watching. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.
Bye!